A peaceful afternoon in the park turned into a harrowing ordeal for an elderly woman who never expected to face the cruelty of two aggressive police officers. Without cause, they confronted her, their accusations baseless. Before she could utter a word in her defense, they forcibly grabbed her, threw her to the ground, and handcuffed her, treating her with unnecessary brutality. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, an unexpected hero stepped in, none other than the legendary Mike Tyson. What unfolded next was nothing short of extraordinary. Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion known for his ferocity in the ring, had developed a routine of visiting Greenwood Park after his training sessions. These moments of solitude provided him with a rare sense of peace, a chance to step away from the limelight and simply exist without the weight of fame pressing down on him. That day, as he strolled down the familiar path lined with towering trees, a commotion caught his attention. The sharp, agitated voices of two officers filled the air, their words directed at a frail elderly woman seated on a nearby bench. Instinctively, Mike turned to assess the situation. His keen eyes locked onto the distressing scene as one of the officers yanked the woman's arm, pulling her so forcefully that she lost her balance and tumbled onto the hard pavement. The sight made his blood boil. He didn't know who she was, but her fearful, confused expression stirred something deep within him. It reminded him of his past, of times when he, too, was powerless in the face of injustice. The elderly woman trembled as Officer Blake tightened the handcuffs around her thin wrists, completely disregarding her attempts to explain herself. A handful of bystanders watched in silence, some recording the incident on their phones, but no one dared to intervene. That was until Mike took a deep breath and stepped forward, his presence radiating strength and purpose. "Hey," he called out, his voice firm but measured. "What's going on here? She was just sitting on a bench. Is this how you serve justice?" The officers turned sharply, their irritation evident. Carter, the more aggressive of the two, sneered, "This is none of your business. Move along before you find yourself in trouble." Mike remained rooted to the spot, his tone unwavering. "Treating an elderly woman like this isn't right. You have no reason to do this. Let her go." Blake chuckled mockingly, nudging his partner. "Look at this guy. Thinks he's some kind of hero." Carter crossed his arms, eyeing Mike with disdain. "We're law enforcement. We don't take orders from random civilians. If you know what's good for you, you'll walk away." Mike clenched his fists but kept his composure. He had learned long ago that rage alone wouldn't solve problems, but he was also a man who refused to stand by in the face of injustice. Looking at the elderly woman's helpless expression, a thought echoed in his mind: if I don't do something, who will? Stepping closer, he positioned himself between the officers and the woman. "Ma'am," he said gently, bending slightly to meet her gaze, "are you all right? What happened?" Before she could respond, Carter stepped forward aggressively. "I told you to back off. You're obstructing law enforcement." Mike didn't flinch. His voice remained calm but carried undeniable authority. "Obstructing what? You haven't provided any explanation or evidence. This is an abuse of power, and I won't stand by and watch." The crowd, now growing larger, murmured in agreement. More phones were raised, recording every second. Blake shifted uneasily, realizing that public perception was turning against them. Still, he tried to hold his ground. "Listen, big guy, you don't want to mess with us. Walk away now before we have to take action against you." Mike stood tall, his posture exuding unshakable resolve. "I'm not afraid of threats, and I won't let you do this. You're making a mistake, one that the entire world is about to witness." Whispers rippled through the crowd as people began to recognize him. "That's Mike Tyson," someone murmured. "He's standing up for her." Carter's frustration peaked. "I don't care who you are," he spat. "You have no right to interfere." Mike smirked slightly, but his eyes remained piercing. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is doing the right thing. Look around, everyone is watching. Do you really want this to go viral?" Blake glanced nervously at the phones recording them. Some members of the crowd had started chanting, "Let her go. Stop the abuse of power." The tension was thick, but the officers weren't backing down. Carter, still trying to maintain his dominance, barked, "You're all obstructing justice. We can arrest every single one of you for inciting a disturbance." But instead of retreating, the crowd only grew louder. An elderly woman in the audience, her voice filled with defiance, called out, "No one is afraid of you. This isn't justice, it's oppression." Mike took another step forward, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. You have a choice. Let her go now, or deal with the consequences of your actions. The world is watching. Blake exchanged a quick glance with Carter, hesitation flickering in his eyes. But Carter, doubling down on his arrogance, gestured toward the patrol car. Put her in the vehicle. We can't let them think we're weak. Just as they moved toward the woman, Mike blocked their path. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the park. And then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the tension. A police cruiser pulled up, and a man with a commanding presence stepped out, Lieutenant Taylor, the office's superior. His gaze swept over the scene before settling on Blake and Carter. What's going on here? He demanded, his tone authoritative. Blake straightened, clearly relieved by the arrival of his superior. Sir, we were apprehending a suspect, but this man was interfering and inciting the crowd. Mike turned to Taylor, his voice calm but firm. They're not arresting a suspect. They're abusing their authority. This woman was simply sitting on a bench when they attacked her without reason. Taylor's sharp eyes shifted to the elderly woman, still trembling and handcuffed. He turned back to his officers. Do you have evidence against her? Any reports confirming she's a suspect? Blake hesitated. We thought she matched a description of a suspect from earlier today. We acted on instinct. Taylor's expression darkened. Instinct. Or an abuse of power. The tension in the air was palpable as the crowd gathered, watching the two officers, Blake and Carter, stand stiffly under the scrutinizing gaze of Lieutenant Taylor. Their silence was deafening, their expressions unreadable as the lieutenant demanded, I want to see your exact reports right now. But neither of them responded. Their lack of words spoke volumes. Taylor turned towards Mike Tyson, his tone shifting from authority to gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Tyson, for stepping in. I will handle this immediately. Thank you for helping us uphold justice. Without hesitation, Taylor then turned back to Blake and Carter, his voice firm with command. Immediately remove the handcuffs and leave this place. I will handle you two later. Reluctantly, Blake stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he unlocked the cuffs from the elderly woman's frail wrists. Carter, his face pale, took a step back, looking around uncomfortably. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the park. A voice boomed from within the crowd, Mike Tyson is our hero. But Mike didn't revel in the admiration. He bent down, his movements gentle as he reached out to the elderly woman. Are you okay? I'll make sure you're safe. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gave a small nod, overwhelmed by emotion. Mike helped her stand, his strong hands steadying her as he led her away from the scene. The cheers of the crowd continued, but Mike's mind was elsewhere. He knew this wasn't the end. As he guided the elderly woman to a bench a short distance away, he turned to face the onlookers and Lieutenant Taylor. His expression was no longer just one of frustration, it was one of purpose. The crowd had quieted slightly, waiting for what would come next. Mike stepped forward, his deep voice carrying the weight of the moment. Today, we saw something that should never happen. Abuse of power. An elderly woman, who did nothing wrong, was harassed and beaten by those who were supposed to protect her. If no one had been here, would it have stopped? Would justice have been served? The crowd roared in response, voices rising in agreement. A man's voice cut through the noise. We see this happen all the time, but no one ever stands up. Mike's gaze swept across the sea of people. That's exactly why I won't stay silent. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, but it must be the last time we let it happen without standing up. I don't know this woman, but I know she didn't deserve this. And I know that we all have a duty to protect what's right. Lieutenant Taylor took a step forward, raising his hand in a request for silence. His voice rang out with conviction. I understand your outrage. I, too, am a police officer, and I am ashamed of what I have witnessed today. The actions of these officers do not represent the values of our force. I promise a full investigation, and those responsible will be held accountable. Mike narrowed his eyes slightly, his sharp gaze locking onto Taylor's. Promises are good, but actions are better. I hope you mean what you say. Not just for these two officers but for the entire system that allows this kind of behavior to continue. Taylor hesitated for only a moment before nodding firmly. You're right. I will personally oversee this investigation. Abuse of power will not be tolerated. Mike turned back to the crowd, his voice steady yet powerful. "We can't let this continue. The police are not our enemies, but those who abuse their power must be removed. Today, we stood together. Let's continue to stand together. Not just for the vulnerable, but to ensure that no one has to live in fear." Applause erupted once again. A young woman raised her phone high, recording the moment. Mike Tyson isn't just a legendary boxer, he's a hero of justice. Another voice, deeper, older, called out, "We stand with you, Mike. Justice must be served." Mike turned back to the elderly woman, helping her rise from the bench. She was still trembling, but her eyes had lost some of their fear. She looked up at him, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank you, young man. I don't know what would have happened without you." Mike offered her a reassuring smile. "No need to thank me, ma'am. I just did what anyone should do." With slow, careful steps, he led her away from the scene. The crowd remained, some still recording, some discussing in hushed but determined voices. Mike knew that what had happened today was just a small step. But it had planted hope. And that, he knew, was how change began. As Mike left with the elderly woman, the videos taken by the crowd spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, news outlets had picked up the footage, and the public outcry was swift and fierce. The pressure was overwhelming, forcing the police department to take immediate action. Lieutenant Taylor announced the immediate suspension of Blake and Carter, pending a full investigation. A special investigative team from the Department of the Interior was assembled to assess not only the actions of these officers but the broader failings of the system that had allowed them to act without consequence for so long. Evidence quickly mounted. Videos captured by bystanders showed the elderly woman sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap, before Blake and Carter forcefully pulled her from the bench and handcuffed her without cause. Witness testimonies, including those from Mike Tyson and the woman herself, identified as Mrs. Martha Johnson, painted an undeniable picture of police brutality. As the investigation deepened, it was revealed that Blake and Carter had a history of misconduct. Multiple complaints had been filed against them over the years, but each one had been dismissed without consequence. Small protests erupted outside the police station. Banners demanding justice and police reform filled the streets, and major news outlets continued to report on the unfolding scandal. Mike Tyson, once a champion in the ring, now found himself a champion of justice. In interviews, he spoke passionately about the importance of standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. "People who have no voice need to be protected, not threatened," he said. His words resonated across the nation, fueling an already growing movement for accountability in law enforcement. Eventually, Blake and Carter were summoned to a disciplinary hearing. Blake attempted to defend himself, insisting they were merely doing their duty, ensuring public safety. But the evidence was undeniable. The committee condemned their actions, stating they had used excessive force without justification. Carter tried to plead for leniency, but Lieutenant Taylor stood firm. "You were given chances before," he said, his tone steely. "But your actions have destroyed the trust that people have in this force." The final verdict was swift and decisive. Blake and Carter were dismissed from duty for gross misconduct and abuse of power. Their records were sent to the Department of Justice for review, with the possibility of criminal charges for excessive use of force and violation of civil rights. The police department publicly acknowledged the failure of its oversight and committed to internal reforms. When asked about the outcome, Mike Tyson remained resolute. "This is a step in the right direction. It sends a message that those who abuse power will no longer be protected. The time for silence is over." Mike continued his advocacy, engaging in community efforts to push for reform. He knew this wasn't just about a single incident in a park. This was about something bigger, about standing up, about making sure that justice wasn't just a word, but an action. Justice must always be safeguarded, regardless of who takes a stand to defend it. The events in the park and Mike Tyson's decisive actions triggered a movement that would ignite lasting changes within the police force. The overwhelming public outcry, coupled with Lieutenant Taylor's firm commitment to reform, led the police department to embark on a sweeping renewal plan aimed at restoring the community's trust. Under the new directive, Lieutenant Taylor mandated that every officer undergo intensive training programs covering professional ethics, cultural awareness, and nonviolent crisis intervention techniques. These sessions emphasized that the role of law enforcement is not to impose authority over citizens but to protect and serve them. The objective was to dismantle the ingrained culture of intimidation and instead cultivate an environment where justice and fairness prevailed. To prevent further abuses of power, a new complaint handling system was introduced, enabling citizens to report misconduct anonymously. Each complaint would be independently reviewed by an external committee to ensure transparency and accountability. Additionally, officers were encouraged to report any misconduct by their colleagues without fear of retaliation, reinforcing a culture of integrity within the force. Though Mike Tyson was not officially part of the police force, he became a relentless advocate for these reforms. He frequently attended community meetings, sharing his perspective and urging people to demand justice. At a major public gathering, he addressed the crowd passionately, his words resonating with deep conviction. Today, we saw something that should never happen, an abuse of power. An elderly woman, who did nothing wrong, was harassed and assaulted by those sworn to protect her. If we hadn't been there, would this have ever stopped? Would justice have been served? The crowd erupted in agreement. A man in the front row shouted, "We see this all the time, but no one ever stands up." Mike scanned the crowd, his expression resolute. That's why silence is no longer an option. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, but it must be the last time we allow it to go unanswered. I don't know this woman, but I know she didn't deserve to be treated this way. And I know all of us share the responsibility to stand up for what's right. Lieutenant Taylor stepped forward, raising his hand to command attention. I understand your frustration. As a police officer, I, too, am appalled by what I witnessed today. The actions of these officers do not represent the values of our department. I give you my word that I will personally oversee a full investigation and ensure that those responsible are held accountable. Mike took a step closer, locking eyes with Taylor. Words are easy, Lieutenant. Actions are what matter. I hope your promise extends beyond these two officers. This is about more than one incident, it's about fixing a system that allows this to happen in the first place. Taylor hesitated for a moment before nodding. You're right. Change starts now. I will not tolerate any abuse of power under my watch. The crowd stood in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. Mike turned back to them, his voice steady. The police are not our enemies. But those who misuse their power cannot remain among their ranks. Today, we stood together. Let's continue standing together, not just to protect the vulnerable but to ensure that no one lives in fear. Applause and cheers erupted. A young woman lifted her phone, recording. Mike Tyson isn't just a legend in the ring, he's a hero of justice. A middle-aged man joined in, his voice booming. We're with you, Mike. Justice must be served. Mike turned his attention back to the elderly woman, still trembling but visibly comforted by the show of solidarity. She looked up at him, her voice hoarse. Thank you, young man. I don't know what would have happened without you. Mike smiled reassuringly. You don't need to thank me, ma'am. I just did what anyone should do. As he escorted her away, the crowd lingered, their voices buzzing with conversations, their phones capturing the moment. Mike knew that while today's events had made an impact, the battle for justice was far from over. True change required vigilance and a community unwilling to back down. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Taylor turned his focus back to Blake and Carter, his expression hardened. You two have disgraced our entire department. This will not be ignored. Carter opened his mouth to protest, but Taylor swiftly raised his hand, silencing him. No excuses. You're relieved of duty effective immediately. We'll handle this properly. Stripped of their former arrogance, Blake and Carter had no choice but to leave the park under the disdainful glares of the crowd. Their fall from authority was swift and humiliating, a reminder that no one is above the law. As Mike Tyson continued escorting the elderly woman home, his mind was occupied by the day's events. He knew he alone couldn't dismantle an entire corrupt system, but he had struck a critical blow against injustice. Small actions, he realized, could trigger a powerful wave of change. And change begins when people refuse to remain silent. News of the park incident quickly went viral. Social media flooded with footage of the abuse and Mike Tyson's intervention. The public outcry was swift and intense, pressuring the police department to take immediate action. Within hours, Lieutenant Taylor announced the suspension of officers Blake and Carter, pending a full investigation. The Department of the Interior formed an independent investigative unit to scrutinize not only the incident but also the broader management failures within the department. The evidence mounted quickly: video footage from the scene, statements from eyewitnesses, and official records revealing a troubling pattern of misconduct. Mrs. Martha Johnson, the elderly woman at the center of it all, provided a powerful testimony, exposing the brutality she endured. The investigation uncovered that Blake and Carter had multiple prior complaints of misconduct, all of which had been ignored or dismissed without proper review. The revelation sparked citywide protests, with demonstrators demanding justice and sweeping police reforms. Banners bearing slogans like, "Justice for all," and "No more abuse of power," flooded the streets. The media extensively covered the case, amplifying Mike Tyson's message. In a televised interview, he stated, "People without a voice need to be protected, not threatened. This isn't just about two bad cops, it's about a system that allows them to exist." Human rights organizations joined in, increasing pressure on the authorities. Under immense scrutiny, the police disciplinary committee convened a formal hearing. Blake attempted to defend himself, insisting they had only been doing their duty. However, the video evidence shattered his claim. The committee ruled that their actions were unjustifiable, that they had no probable cause, and that they had failed to follow proper protocols. Carter tried pleading for leniency, but Lieutenant Taylor was unyielding. "You had your chance to do the right thing. Instead, you betrayed the badge you swore to uphold." The final verdict: both Blake and Carter were permanently dismissed from the police force, and their case was forwarded to the Department of Justice for potential criminal charges, including unlawful use of force and civil rights violations. The decision was publicly announced, marking a pivotal moment in the fight against police misconduct. When asked about the outcome, Mike Tyson responded, "It's a step in the right direction. Let this be a message: those who abuse their power will be held accountable. The era of silence is over." With his influence, Mike continued advocating for justice, attending community forums, and pushing for police reforms. For him, the incident in the park was not just a confrontation, it was a call to action, a moment that proved that when people stand together, real change is possible. Reform was necessary, and Mike Tyson knew that his influence could be a powerful tool in promoting meaningful change. To him, the incident in the park was more than just a confrontation, it was a stark reminder that justice is fragile and must be defended at all costs. It didn't matter who took a stand, what mattered was ensuring that fairness and dignity were upheld for everyone. The shocking events that unfolded in the park, coupled with Mike Tyson's decisive intervention, ignited a movement that would send ripples through the entire police system. Under immense public pressure and with Lieutenant Taylor's unwavering dedication to reform, the police department initiated a transformative renewal plan aimed at restoring community trust. This wasn't just about damage control, it was about fundamentally restructuring how the police interacted with the people they swore to protect. Lieutenant Taylor declared that every officer would be required to participate in intensive training programs focused on professional ethics, cultural awareness, and nonviolent crisis intervention techniques. These sessions underscored a crucial principle: the role of law enforcement is not to wield power over the community but to serve and protect it with integrity and empathy. A new complaint handling system was introduced, granting citizens the ability to report instances of misconduct anonymously. Each complaint would be thoroughly examined and reviewed by an independent external committee, ensuring complete transparency. Officers were also encouraged to report their colleagues for unethical behavior without fear of retaliation, reinforcing a culture of accountability within the force. Although Mike Tyson was not officially part of the police force, he emerged as a formidable advocate for these reforms. He actively participated in community meetings, where he shared his experiences and urged people to persist in their fight for justice. Standing before a sea of hopeful faces, he once declared, "This isn't just about an elderly woman in a park. This is about all of us. This is about a system that has to change. If we don't stand up, who will? Each of us has a responsibility in shaping a fairer world." His words resonated deeply, not just within the community but far beyond. His presence at these gatherings did more than inspire, it attracted widespread media coverage, ensuring that the push for reform remained in the public eye. He reminded everyone that real change doesn't happen overnight, it demands time, persistence, and the collective effort of a determined people. As these changes took root, the results became evident. Younger officers, particularly those new to the force, displayed a renewed commitment to fostering positive relationships with the community. Numerous police community engagement programs were established, breaking down barriers of distrust and allowing both sides to understand each other better. Officers became actively involved in schools, churches, and local gatherings, genuinely listening to the concerns of the citizens they served. These conversations were not just symbolic, they were instrumental in bridging the divide between law enforcement and the public, fostering a newfound sense of mutual respect. At the heart of this movement stood Mrs. Martha Johnson, the elderly woman whose harrowing experience in the park had sparked this wave of change. Instead of being remembered as a victim, she became a beacon of resilience and courage. She joined Mike Tyson at community forums, sharing her ordeal and urging others never to remain silent in the face of injustice. Her story, along with Mike Tyson's involvement, transcended the boundaries of their city, capturing the attention of the entire nation. It served as a powerful testament to the idea that one person, through sheer will and determination, could initiate a domino effect of progress. Social media platforms erupted with support, with hashtags like #JusticeForMartha and #StandWithMike trending as thousands shared their own encounters with injustice, refusing to let their voices go unheard. Mike Tyson's advocacy did not stop at police reform. He expanded his efforts to educational initiatives and community programs, emphasizing the importance of instilling values of fairness, integrity, and respect in young minds. He understood that true reform had to begin at the grassroots level, shaping future generations to be more compassionate and just. Meanwhile, Mrs. Martha, having fully recovered both physically and emotionally, was no longer just an ordinary citizen, she was a living testament to the power of standing up for what is right. She often recounted her near-death experience, saying, "That day, I thought I wouldn't live to see another sunrise. But because Mike stood up, I got a second chance. He restored my faith in people and in justice." Their story became more than just an inspiring narrative, it became an emblem of unity and the relentless pursuit of justice. It demonstrated that no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, justice will always find a way to prevail, so long as there are those willing to fight for it. Systemic change is never instant, but with each voice raised and each step taken, society inches closer to fairness and equity. Mike Tyson, reflecting on everything that had transpired, was not driven by a desire for recognition. What truly mattered to him was the knowledge that he had refused to turn a blind eye to injustice. He had done what was right, and in doing so, he had given hope to countless others. With a smile, he continued his journey, knowing that this fight was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a much larger mission, one that he was ready to take on, no matter how long it took. The story of Mike Tyson and Mrs. Martha is not just about two individuals, it is about the power of community, resilience, and collective action in the face of injustice. It serves as a stark reminder that in a world where unfairness often prevails, even the smallest act of courage can ignite a revolution. Regardless of who you are or where you come from, you have the ability to make a difference. Justice is not a given, it must be actively defended and fought for each day. Through unity, trust, and perseverance, we can all play a role in building a world that prioritizes compassion, fairness, and respect. If this story has moved you, share it to spread this powerful message. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more inspiring and impactful stories. Together, we can create change, starting today.